Hi guys, and welcome to today's video. Today's a very exciting one because we're going to be talking about my top 24 books of 2024. I have them all right here, all in order for me to reveal to you. This video is going to be long, I know it, so let's just get on into the video. All right guys, in 24th place is Hot British Boyfriend by Christy Boyce. I actually don't have a physical copy of it because I just loaned it from my library when I read it, and I really loved this book. I thought it was so cute. It's about this girl studying abroad in London with her classmates. I believe it's in high school though. She's motivated to go to London for study abroad because she's getting bullied by a group of people at school for a video that came out. So she decides to go to London. She meets a lot of new friends. There's kind of like a found family element, which I really appreciated. Our main girl in it, I don't remember her name actually. I'm really bad with remembering characters' names, but she ends up hitting it off with this British boy. But is she actually also getting feelings for her friend? It's a little messy, but I really liked it a lot. The next book I also don't have a physical copy of, and that's The Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Canas. It takes place in like the mid 1800s between the Texas and Mexico border, but the problem is that there's this war going on, and not only is there a war going on between the humans, but there are these humans turning into supposedly vampires. I think the part about reading this book that I really loved is I kind of went into it blind, so I don't really want to say too much more about it, but the writing was so good, the romance in it was just so beautiful, and I just really enjoyed my time throughout the whole thing. All right, number 22, I have a physical copy, and that is Past, Present, Future by Rachel and Solomon. This was released actually this past year, and this is the sequel to Today, Tonight, Tomorrow by Rachel and Solomon, which is a YA romance book that takes place in Seattle between two high schoolers. It's kind of like an academic rivals to lovers story, and I absolutely love that book, and so I was very nervous for the sequel to come out, but overall I did enjoy it. Like, I really had a great time. I've talked about this a little bit, but I don't think that this should be marketed as a YA. I feel like there's a lot of mature content in this, like not an excessive amount, but just I feel like in a way too much for it to be categorized as a YA. But overall, really loved this, and I feel like the main like conflicts in this book felt purposeful and not just to like force a sequel. This next book, I was very surprised how much I liked it, and that is Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood. In the past, Ali Hazelwood hasn't necessarily been my favorite author. For me, a lot of her books have been hit or miss, but I really enjoyed my time reading this. This is, in my opinion, the spiciest book that she's come out with. It's about like, I can never remember the books that I read. The two characters in this, like, they have issues, and the way they go about fixing their issues or just like suppressing them is not in a healthy manner, I would say, but they do find each other through, how do I say this? Participating in specific activities. But I feel like the main thing I loved about this book was how obsessed the two characters were with each other. I loved their connection. I thought it was very sweet, had a very happy ending, and it was just like drama filled, and I love a dramatic book. Number 20 on the list is The Ministry of Time by Kellyanne Bradley. This book was so fun to read. I was in a reading slump, I feel like, before I got into reading this book, and I ate it up. I was obsessed with it. This book is marketed as science fiction. There is like a time travel aspect to this book, but there's also a little bit of like romance too, which I feel like you wouldn't necessarily suspect. Our main character in this book works for a government ministry where she's tasked as working as a sort of bridge between people from the past and them kind of being introduced to life in the current present. That makes sense for sure. But our main character is assigned the task of keeping watch over Commander Graham Gore, I believe his name is. So he has to live with her. She has to make sure that he's adapting to this new world. There's also something sinister going down at the same time. But overall, this book was so entertaining. I've never read a book like it before, and I really enjoyed my time. Next book, I listened to the audiobook of it and I don't have a physical copy, and that is Cultish by Amanda Montell. I feel like I don't necessarily read a lot of nonfiction books, but this one I found super entertaining. I'm just like super fascinated with the idea of cults and like past ones that have been established, and I feel like what I thought this book was going to be was a little bit different than what it ended up being. In this book, we kind of get a main history about how different cults, like famous cults throughout time, have been established. But what I also really appreciate is that they talked about, you know, like multi-level marketing schemes, and I think it's core yoga or core power yoga or something, just like cults like that are a little sneakier than your normal cult. And I really appreciate how in the end, you know, I feel like there's this whole talk about how could people ever get into a cult, but I feel like it had a really beautiful message of that the reason people get sucked into these cults, like the main reason is just like loneliness and then needing a sense of community, and how we should all be sensitive and like kind to those that have gone through these experiences. And I really appreciated that. I thought that was a really nice way to end the book. Next book is A Study in Drowning by Ava Reed. The cover is so shiny. I just feel like with this book, it should have a matte cover. Am I crazy? I don't like the shininess. But anyways, I was late to the bandwagon. I really was. I read this maybe a month or two ago and I really enjoyed it. It's like a dark academia YA fantasy where we follow our main character Effie, and she lives in a society where it's very difficult for women to get an education. So she is able to go to this prestigious school, but women are only allowed to study architecture. So as an architecture student, she gets called to this mysterious island, I believe. Is it an island? Where she's tasked with refurbishing this really old home of this person. Along the way, she meets Preston? Yes, Preston, who is an English student, and Effie's main dream is to be an English student, so they kind of have this little bit of rivalry. But once they get to the house and are trying to restore it, they kind of find out that maybe there's something else going on for why they're there. And overall, this was like creepy and beautiful. I loved the romance elements in this book. There's a lot of good discussions in this book as well. I won't go into it too much, but definitely check trigger warnings. There are some tough subjects that this book covers, but overall I really loved this book. Number 17, I don't have a physical copy of it, but that is The Third Gilmore by Kelly Bishop. This is Kelly Bishop's memoir that she just released, I think in September or something. I listened to the audiobook because for memoirs, I have to listen to the audiobook for some reason. I just love hearing the author read their life to you. I just think that's so special. And if you don't know who Kelly Bishop is, she plays Emily Gilmore in the hit TV show Gilmore Girls, and I absolutely love Gilmore Girls, so I knew I had to read her memoir, and I feel like it was better than I even thought it was going to be. She has lived such an interesting life, and I just really loved her story. I don't know, I had just a great time, and I guess that's all I'll say. Number 16 is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. This is my gorgeous Fairy Loot edition. I'm obsessed with it. I actually listened to the audiobook of this book and I would recommend it. I really enjoyed the narrators. So in this book, we follow two characters that meet at a hospital and they immediately strike up a friendship over their love for video games. And it's not till they're older that they decide that between the two of them that they will make a video game. And that's kind of the main gist of the story. Obviously, there's so much that goes down in this book. It's not just them making a video game. It's very character driven, which those are my favorite types of books. This book will absolutely destroy you if you have a heart and a soul. This book destroyed me. I just remember I was on a walk and I was listening to the audiobook and I was just like bawling my eyes out due to something that happened. Absolutely loved it. Go read it. For a while, I thought this was going to be one of like in my top 5 books of the year, but you know what number is it? It's 16 because I read so many good books this year that this book is amazing and it's at 16. So number 15, Love of My Afterlife by Kirsty. Greenwood. This book is so cute. It reminds me so much of While You Were Sleeping with Sandra Bullock. I love that movie. I watched it 2 times last week because I love that movie so much. And it's like Christmassy and I love it. So in this book, we follow our main girl, Delphi, and she has just found out that she has died because she choked on a hamburger. So she's in the afterlife and she's realizing in her life, she really didn't do anything. And she stumbles upon this guy, Jonah, who they immediately hit it off. They're flirting, they're having a great time. But Jonah actually isn't supposed to be in the afterlife. He's kind of just in this like unconscious state and he returns to Earth. But Delphi meets a friend in the afterlife that wants to help her out. Her friend loves romance books. There's like really fun mentions of like Emily Henry books and like Emily Henry characters, and I think they mention like Bridgerton and other famous romance books and romance authors. So her friend in the afterlife is kind of like a guardian angel in a way, and she decides she's gonna help Delphi go back to Earth and find Jonah and fall in love. So Delphi can go back to Earth. She has, I believe, like 10 days to find Jonah and kiss him. But as Delphi goes back to Earth and tries to find Jonah, there's a bunch of things that happen along the way. Maybe she realizes Jonah isn't her soulmate after all. Overall, I really loved this book and I cannot recommend it enough. 14. The Hunger Games. This book is so stiff, I hate it. But what's in it, I love. I read it on my Kindle, obviously. I had never read The Hunger Games before this year. I read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, but I have yet to finish the trilogy. I did a video a little bit ago where I read a book and then I watched their adaptation, and I read The Hunger Games in that video, and I absolutely loved it. I was not expecting I was gonna love the book that much. I mean, like, it's always on the bestsellers list, so I should have known, but I guess I was just stupid and just didn't think I would need to read it since I've watched the movies. Obviously, you get so much more detail from the books than you do with the movies. I just had a great time. I don't feel like I need to share the synopsis of The Hunger Games. Everyone knows what it is. So, had a great time with this. Lucky number 13. The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. I think this was the first book that I read this year, actually. And I do really want to reread it because I loved it so much. This was at the top of my list for a while throughout the year. But in this book, we follow Clementine, who has just inherited her aunt's magical apartment because her aunt just passed away. And the special thing about this apartment is that once you go into the apartment, sometimes it will take you back in time. And so that's what happens for Clementine. But one time when that happens, finds a strange man in the apartment. They hit it off, but the problem is he only knows her in the 7 years in the past. But what's she gonna do when she gets back into like the present moment? There's so many good quotes. Like, I want to reread it and like highlight some of the quotes because I'm obsessed with it. I feel like it's such a good book about like grief and also just really living in the present moment, which I love books about that. The romance in this, loved it. The guy in this book is a chef, and I just loved how they talked about the food that he was making. I know that's kind of weird, but I just really loved this book. I feel like it was just beautiful. It was what I needed at the time, and I definitely want to reread it. Number 12, Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. This is my Fairy Loot version. This is the sequel and finale to the Divine Rivals duology. I think it's called like Letters of Enchantment is what like the actual series is called. But yes, this one came out, I believe, last December, I'm pretty sure. I know a lot of people, they didn't enjoy this, but I really enjoyed this. It broke my heart, the ending. I was just like sobbing. I think I have a video of it somewhere on this channel. I think it was like in a 24-hour readathon I read it, and I was just sobbing. I feel like I can't necessarily talk about this too much because I don't want to give any spoilers, but in the first book, Divine Rivals, the characters live in this world where there are gods that are feuding, and so there's a war that is about to start happening. Our main characters, they work at is it a newspaper? Gazette? Or is it just, I think it's a newspaper gazette. And they kind of have like a workplace rivalry that maybe turns into a romance, I don't know. One day, our main character is using her typewriter at home, and she realizes that she's receiving these mysterious letters somehow in her room. So it seems like someone is communicating with her through her special typewriter, and she's connected somehow with someone. Can you guess who? I don't know, but loved that book and I loved the finale. I think it's a perfect series. That is my review. Number 11, Dungeons and Drama by Christy Boyce. This is the second Christy Boyce book on this list. Look how cute this cover is. Like, have you actually seen anything cuter? I'm obsessed with this book. This book I read at the exact time I needed to. I think it was February last year, I'm pretty sure. I love a YA romance, and I feel like Christy Boyce does such a good job with her YA romances of not making them cringe, but also like keeping them readable for the genre. In this book, we follow our main girl right here. What's her name? In this book, we follow our main character, Riley, and she has just gotten in trouble with her parents for, I think she was like driving too late at night or whatever. So they force her to, not force, I guess. Well, I guess they kind of do. Work at her dad's game store and just like help out with it. While she's at the game store, she runs into this guy right here who loves Dungeons and Dragons and is a little bit rude to her. So they have kind of like an enemies sort of relationship. But there's also fake dating in this book too. Like, I don't want to give up too much of it. She ends up hanging out with the nerds, but she's also a musical theater nerd. Okay, that's why she got in trouble. I think she was like driving to a musical late at night or something, which I love. I would do. My legs are falling asleep. One of the things I will be most grateful for 2024 will be reading the League of Extraordinary Women series. And that is why number 10, we're in the top 10, guys, is going to be Bringing Down the Duke by Evie Dunmore. I absolutely loved this book and I love this series. We may or may not mention some more in a little bit, but these books take place in the late 1800s in England, and we follow a group of friends that are trying to work through the women's suffrage movement there. And each book in the series follows a different girl in the friend group. And in this book, we follow our girl Annabelle, and she may or may not end up in a relationship with the Duke. I didn't say anything. I love Evie Dunmore's writing. I just think it's amazing. Her books are so interesting. I feel like it's just such a well-developed romance series because it's not just like fluff, which like isn't bad in a romance book, but in this one, I feel like they talk about some really important issues. It's entertaining. The romance is so good, very steamy, and I love these characters so much. I have recommended them like a bajillion times, I think, but I absolutely love it. Go read it if you haven't. All right, number 9, The Crimson Moth by Kristen Ciccarelli. I think that's how you say her name. I was super surprised about how much I liked this book, like very surprised, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. This book is a YA fantasy, and we follow our main girl. I think her name is Rune, and she is secretly a witch actually, but she's living in a society where witches are being hunted, and so she actually has to disguise herself as a society woman, and she befriends the prince. I forget if he's a prince or just like high up in society, but she has a friend that's a prince and then also another friend, but her friend that may or may not be a prince, I can't remember, his brother is actually the famous witch hunter in the society that they live in. There's this person called the Crimson Moth that is a witch that's been helping other witches escape, and that's actually Rune, and he's trying to figure out who that is. And so they end up actually, like, she's spying on him and he's spying on her, but neither of them know that the other is doing that. Am I explaining that well? I don't think I am. But they kind of do like a fake dating thing to get information from each other, but they may or may not be actually becoming interested in each other. Did I explain that well? I don't know. Go look up a summary if you're interested at all. Summaries are not my strong suit. Number 8, another Evie Dunmore, Portrait of a Scotsman. In this book, we follow Hattie. I think Hattie is my favorite female character in the book series, and I absolutely love this book. I feel like the tropes in this one are marriage at convenience, one bed, and kind of enemies to lovers in a way, but I loved this book. I devoured it. Hattie is so cute. The male main character in this, I was saying to my friends, I feel like he's like if Kaz Brecker was Mr. Darcy. Like, that together. That's who he reminds me of. That may or may not sound very bad and toxic, but it makes for a really great reading experience. Number 7, A Fire Endless by Rebecca Ross. I love this book series so much. The first book in this series is A River Enchanted, and I absolutely loved this series. I found it for the first time this year. I feel like I just read every Rebecca Ross book I could get my hands on and had an amazing time. This is the second book in the series, so I can't really talk a lot about this book, but I may or may not be talking about the first one in a short moment, so wait for me. But this is number 7. Such a great ending to the series. This series makes me feel so many things. I love the characters so much, and that's all I'll say for right now. Number 6, we have Heir by Sabaa Tahir. This is my Fairy Loot edition, and it's literally stunning. This is a kind of continuation of her Ember in the Ashes quartet. I love that series so much. That's one of my favorite fantasy series of all time. And so when I heard she was coming out with another, I think this is supposed to be a duology, if I'm not mistaken. I'm pretty sure. I can't really talk too much about this book, I feel like, because you definitely need to read the Ember in the Ashes quartet before you read this book right here, because there's a lot of characters from the Ember in the Ashes series that are mentioned in this and kind of details from that series that might ruin it if you haven't read that. Sabaa Tahir, I will read anything she comes out with and I'll have an amazing time. But this book, we follow 3 main characters, and I love how each chapter is from a perspective of a different character. It really keeps you engaged. I feel like sometimes in like first person or just there's one main character, you can kind of get into a little bit of a lull, at least for me. Love this book. Met my expectations 100%. The plot twist was crazy. I want to reread the book knowing what the plot twist was, because that was crazy. All right, guys, we are at the top 5. Don't look right there for spoilers. That's rude if you do. Is the lighting weird? Oh, let me go close the blind real fast. Okay, it might be a little darker now, but that just means it looks cozier. So, number 5, we have A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. I love the duology so much, and I feel like pretty much they are tied, but something about the first book in this series I think I liked a little bit more than the second book, A Fire Endless, and I don't really know what it is. But this book starts off with one of our main characters, Jack, getting summoned back to his homeland of Cadence because a lot of the little girls in his village are going missing for some reason, and Jack needs to come back to help them find out what's going on. And Jack has a special ability that he can create music that is like pleasing to the gods on their isle. They're hoping that Jack is able to get the help of the gods to find out what's going on in their village and like why these little girls are going missing. There's just so much about this book. Like, that's the main problem, that's the main plot, but the characters in this book, like I mentioned, they're so multi-dimensional and they feel so real. And there's like a romance in this book that keeps me up at night how much I think about them. I'm obsessed with their relationship, and I think it's one of my favorite romances in like any book I've read ever, and that's saying a lot. Please go read this book. It's very like magical realism. It's similar to Divine Rivals in the way that the citizens in the town interact with the gods, and overall it's just such a beautiful story. It will actually rip your heart out. I'm not lying, it will. You'll just have the best time with it though. It's so beautiful. I caught myself sometimes just like crying while reading it, just based off how beautiful it was. And that's never once happened to me in any book I've read. All right, you might have been able to see that in the back, but number 4 is none other than Funny Story by Emily Henry. This was her new release for this past year. Obviously, I really enjoyed my time. I've never read an Emily Henry book I didn't love, and this was no exception. I loved the plot of this book. I think the setup for it, I've never read a book like that. I loved the 2 characters in this book so much, Daphne Daphne and Miles. I think they had such an amazing friendship, and that was really fun to see. So in this book, we start off with Daphne and Miles. They actually become roommates because their exes actually got together, and their two exes started dating. So they kind of bond over that and decide to move in together, and they're both just going through the 7 stages of grief and everything. And through that, they actually develop a friendship, which turns into a deeper connection. This book is just beautiful. As an Emily Henry book is, it's not just about the romance. It's more about the characters developing and things they go through. It's just beautiful. It's a beautiful story. It's so funny too. Loved it. All right, number 3 is one I just did not think this was going to be as highly rated as it was for me, and that is Lady Macbeth by Ava Reid. I have not heard enough about this book. It got me out of a reading slump, even if it was for a brief moment in time. It's a Shakespearean retelling in a way. If you're familiar with the play Macbeth by Shakespeare, the main villainess in that book is Lady Macbeth, but this is kind of a retelling of like why she did all those things in the book, and like how it was actually in a way that she had to do those things in order to survive. This book is not the same as the play Macbeth. It's definitely an imagination of that, and definitely a retelling. There definitely are topics in this book that were very hard to read, but overall I feel like the way Ava Reid talks about certain topics in her books, I feel like she does it in such a great way that feels purposeful to the plot and for the overall messaging. And I absolutely love this book. I have not stopped thinking about it since I read it. I already want to reread it and like highlight quotes I loved and everything. If you haven't picked it up yet, please go pick it up. Loved it so much. All right, number 2 is my favorite Evie Dunmore book in the series, and that is A Rogue of One's Own. In this book, we follow Lucy, and I love Lucy, I do, but it's the male lead in this book that I'm obsessed with. His name is Tristan, and he's kind of a little bit of a scoundrel or a rogue, which I didn't even know what that meant before this book, I'm gonna be honest. He has been family friends with Lucy and her family for a while now, and from a very young age, Lucy did not like him. She just knew he was bad news, and it's not until when they're older that they kind of start connecting, and she might realize that she, doesn't think those things about him anymore and might have a little bit of a crush. I am just giving you the simplest synopsis about this book, but please go read it if you love a good like enemies to lovers, friends to lovers, also frenemies, friends to family, friends, enemy, family, friend, enemies, family, enemy to lover. I don't know how to say it, but as with other Evie Dunmore books in this series, there's a little bit more than just the romance, and I really love Lucy as a character. She's very serious, very like type A, has to have her way, and I feel like Tristan is such a fun match for her because he kind of like breaks down her walls, and she's able to open up to him, and I absolutely love this book. I think it's so good, and that's all I'll say. All right, we've made it to the number 1 spot. You may know what book this is gonna be, but you may not. And at the number 1 spot for the best book I read in 2024 is none other than The Will of the Many by James Islington, Miss Girl's a Chonker. This is an adult high fantasy, and in it we follow our main character, Vis Telemus, and he lives in a society where there's a hierarchy based off this thing called will. And will pretty much is this like magical power that comes from people, and people are able to like seed will, like take will from other people in order to gain more powers. So in the hierarchy, there's people that are at the very bottom where they're getting will taken from them and given to people at the higher part of the hierarchy. And that's based off like different political positions. I think there's like a chart. which is really funny. So you can see right here, it's like if you're in this like one position of the hierarchy, how many people you receive will from. So it's like the bottom level on 8th, they receive will from no people because they're giving all their will away. But at the very top, it's like they receive will from 40,320 people. So it just determines how much power you have. So Vis lives in this society, but he's secretly actually a prince from a land that was taken over in order to form the hierarchy in the world that they live in today. So he actually has to go undercover, and no one knows that he actually is a prince. His whole family was killed and people are trying to kill him as well, so he has to remain undercover. But in order to make some money, he has been working as a fighter, and he actually gets discovered by this one man who decides to send him to the academy in the society in order to be able to go higher on the hierarchy, to be a spy for him. And there's a lot of stuff that goes on in this book. The ending was insane. I was not expecting that at all. And also the world building in this book, I've never once appreciated good world building until this book. I feel like it's so immersive, it's so well done, and I cannot wait to get my hands on the second book in the series, which I believe comes out in May next year. So this is absolutely my #1 book of the year. All right, guys, that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. I had such a good reading year to start off with. I feel like I definitely got into a reading slump towards the last like 4th of the year, which was very unfortunate. But overall, like looking back on these 24 books that I read, these are some of now like my favorite books of all time. And that's so exciting that I read them all in this one year. If you read any of these books, I would love to know your thoughts on them, because I know some of these books could be a little bit polarizing and some people didn't like them as much. So I would love to hear your thoughts. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.